Hello, everyone. Looking like we have a couple of people coming in. We're just going to give everyone a moment before we start. Looks like our number is still ticking up, so we're just going to give everybody one more minute before we get started. Thank you all for joining us today. All right, it looks like our numbers are evening out. So for everyone's convenience today, we are going to get started. Just a quick general note, we are recording this session. Recording will be sent to you tomorrow after the session has concluded. We have Q&A available on the right hand of your screen, so please feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation. We do have dedicated time at the end of today's session to address them. And without further ado, I give you our presenters, Peter and Jerry. Please take it away, gents.
Hey, thanks, Laura, and good day for everyone, and thanks for joining. My name is Peter Lund. I work for Claroty in the business development side in Tech Alliances. Specifically, one of the partners we're with today is Copia Automation. They're focused on the DevOps of industrial cyber operations. And joining me is Jerry Abbey from Copia. Also great to have you, Jerry. We're going to be discussing convergence of cyber and DevOps and how we future-proof industrial operations. So, Jerry, just before we jump in, maybe tell us a bit about industrial DevOps, kind of a new concept, and it's a concept I'm excited about speaking with you about and what Copia is all about.
Thanks, Pete. Excited to be here. Thanks to our audience for joining, and thanks, Laura, for the introduction. So industrial DevOps is a newer term in our space, and it's something I've been super excited about getting out there and working on over the last year since I joined Copia. I came from Rockwell Automation and Plex Systems before that, and have been working in the plant floor software technology space for a while now. And when I came across this term, industrial DevOps, I really didn't have a lot of familiarity with DevOps, which is where it's derived from. And I love digging deep when I learn about something new. And I traced where DevOps came from through this path of the birth of Agile back in the early 90s, and then how it built off of and was taken from lean manufacturing and the Toyota production system. And as I've dug into what industrial DevOps really is, it's been fascinating to watch this back and forth between manufacturing and the IT space, developing and refining processes that then get tied into technologies to help people be more effective and to really have an exponential impact. So industrial DevOps focuses on applying DevOps principles, which is the merger of the development group and the operations group, and putting them in context for the industrial space, hence the industrial beginning there. And the nuanced difference is that in manufacturing and distribution, unlike IT, you're working with this mix of cyber and physical systems. And industrial DevOps is the application of these principles and this process to remove silos, bring the different parts of the organization together so that you can shift left on thinking about security and thinking about operations and have that entwined with the development stage so that everyone's working together and optimally producing and introducing technology, managing code in a much better way and a much more secure way.
Thanks for that definition, Jerry. And that's interesting because in OT, you've got more than your traditional IT service provider involved. You've got system integrators and people who are writing specialty code and project files on top of PLCs and relays. And to see that transition into DevOps is pretty interesting and exciting, because I know that's something that hasn't really occurred in the past decade of me kind of being involved in industrial cyber. So kudos to you guys. So with that, we'll dive in. And I want to just touch on a few trends that our joint customers are seeing and what's kind of driving a bit in the market right now when it comes to industrial cyber. So the biggest thing is connectivity, right? There is just more and more demand for endpoints to be online, sharing information, whether it be to a cloud historian, whether it be to availability of backup and recovery systems. And oftentimes this expanded connectivity is either unmanaged or even unknown. So it's not uncommon to see a industrial OEM or a GSI show up on site and have a bunch of cellular cards or some other connectivity baked into the product, and they're commissioned. The OT team signs off on everything, and the IT team doesn't necessarily have any visibility or knowledge of that. So oftentimes that expanded connectivity becomes that new threat vector, which kind of dovetails into, with this extended connectivity, we've got more threats. These endpoints are even easier to access than before, and oftentimes don't have the robust security measures that are put in place that we have, traditional endpoint, EDR, MDR solutions. All the things we have around securing cellular networks aren't necessarily always in place. And all that paired with regulatory pressure, and even in today's age of do more with less, we need to leverage even more tools and more automations to make sure that we can, one, first and foremost, stay secure, and two, satisfy any of those kind of regulatory pressures that your industries are facing. And the big thing with Claroty and industry regulations is really about visibility, and asset visibility and network visibility is kind of core to all these standards we see here. So things like the NIST cybersecurity framework, NERC call out, listen, you need to understand your assets, you need to baseline them, you need to know how they're changing, when they're changing, how they're changing. And in some of these specific standards, you need to report on those changes or get audited by a specific governing body. Maybe Jerry, you could chime in with how DevOps is manifesting its way into some of these standards.
Absolutely. So I'll take NIS2, for example. It was implemented officially in October of last year. And one of the biggest things that I'm finding with all of the standards and the governance that's been introduced is confusion. These regulations have come out, and manufacturers, distributors have been faced with trying to figure out how they can meet these and trying to understand when they need to meet these guidelines. And I think NIS2 has faced a soft rollout as they've gotten member states on board. And I was also reading a report that was recently published on the SEC rules in the US. And right at the top of the report, it talked about confusion within organizations on knowing what to report and how to report it. So we're in a very new space right now, and finding ways to partner with experts that can help guide how to address reporting, governance, and getting visibility into what needs to be reported is really essential. And I find that Claroty does an amazing job with supporting customers in navigating this territory. And it's something with industrial DevOps, getting that visibility into your code, the control over it, knowing who's modifying it, when they're modifying it, and having all of that backed up. These are essential pieces within the NIS2 framework and the SEC guidelines that it's not a nice to have, it is a must have, especially as we continue to move forward. Yeah,
and it's a great point. And we always like to speak with, regulators and auditors, and we try to hit the message home that, cyber physical systems aren't the same as IT. they can't have the same standards and reporting guidelines, not necessarily better or worse ones, just different ones to make sure that you're getting the right data to the right folks.
Totally.
So as we roll forward, we're of course seeing more and more cyber attacks, not only in the news, and it's safe to say that not all the cyber attacks we're seeing to CPS systems are even in the news. We're lucky enough to partner with some of the three-letter agencies and other folks to get some deep visibility as to what's going on. But we've got some fun statistics out of our last State of CPS Security report from last year. And I'd just like to highlight that kind of the two corners there. The 50% of organizations experience 12 hours or more of downtime due to an attack. And that's mainly due to most of those endpoints having to be or being connected to the internet. And that's just this large trend that we continue to see moving forward. So one, folks have poor visibility to these endpoints, and two, they're connected with maybe not the most optimal way when it comes to security, visibility, and just management standpoint. If you think of all the different folks who need to have their hands in a CPS endpoint, it might be anyone from IT to OT to third-party vendors to receiving patches from the cloud or pushing data into the cloud. Making sure that you have visibility into all those connections and can see when something changes with them is just paramount here. Jerry's going to touch a bit around how the sort of disruptions and attacks that Claroty sees are much, much different than what Copia is sort of seeing and solving for.
Yeah, exactly, Peter. There's so many pieces of this to pay attention to within the OT space. And I like that you mentioned how it's affecting different departments between IT, OT, your cyber group. And we also did a study this year, the State of Industrial DevOps report, where we asked about downtime and the average cost, just building off of what you said with that 12 plus hours of downtime. The average cost per hour of downtime was $4.2 million, which is a huge cost to the business. And trying to figure out ways to prevent that, we asked this follow-up question, which is the data that we're looking at here. And 50% of all downtime was code related. And then on the right side, we're looking at unplanned downtime. And you can see cybersecurity breaches right there at the top. And as I've dug into the data and talked with different professionals throughout the industry on this, it seems like it's a nuanced response, because maybe not 50% of people are experiencing a full-on breach, but they're experiencing something that they need to mitigate, they need to troubleshoot around, or they need to bolster their defenses because they've seen attacks coming in. And also within these categories, you can see hardware malfunctions, human error, and coding being parts of this unplanned downtime trigger. And when I really look broadly at this overall impact, code can be the basis of all of this. When you think about hardware malfunctions, if somebody on the third shift has changed the speed of a machine through manipulating the code because they need to make their number, and that machine breaks down, that is a software-related issue, and we've seen it time and again in customer conversations. And likewise, with cybersecurity breach, one of the great things about the complementary solutions of bringing Claroty and Copia together is you have that asset identification. So you know what is out there and can shine a light on what might have previously been your shadow OT, where people, just to move things along for the sake of progress, are plugging devices in, but not necessarily getting a CISO or IT approval on it. And those, as a result, may not be getting updated, may have produced a vulnerability that needs to be tracked. And when you have this full visibility with Industrial DevOps, backing up code, and you have Claroty identifying the assets, you can see what might be at risk. And that's so very important looking at this data and the other data we're going to talk through today.
Yeah, I really like that situation of someone having to, increase production to make sure they hit their mark for the quarter. And that's kind of the great part of having visibility plus industrial DevOps is, yes, someone is going to go and issue that command to the HMI to increase speed or potentially push a new project file to change how those machines are running. Getting visibility to that change with something like Claroty now kind of sounds the alarm bell off to saying, hey, someone just made some changes to how the plant is operating. Do you guys have visibility to that? Is this maybe an operator that's gone rogue and, maybe part of the time you can run that, and just kind of providing that closed loop visibility and getting to the kind of convergence of security and operations. So if we talk about some of the disruptions from, the most recent cyber attacks, of course, we can go all the way back to many others here, but there's a big trend here that we're seeing is, one, disruptions are happening, and two, it is generally due to the convergent nature of IT and OT, and whether they're actually converged, or if we want to say convergence is a dirty word, we certainly can. But I love to pick on Colonial Pipeline because people are very quick to say, that the OT side wasn't compromised and it's not really a good example. But what we're here to kind of talk about is, listen, the attacks do occur in IT more often, and they have collateral damage into OT. And if we think about kind of the joint Claroty Copia solution, if you can have good visibility into those systems, you can understand the impact of IT going down, or you can understand the impact of billing going down, but still have the ability to measure your flow or measure your output, or feel confident that the threat hasn't jumped across the IT-OT boundary, and that you have good access points in place and you have visibility. Operations can continue, or if you do have visibility and you see that it's kind of made the jump from one side or the other, you can quickly recover those systems because with clear visibility what's been impacted and what we need to do to sort of put them back together from a backup and restore standpoint. Of course, we've got many attacks, but that's just kind of that one I like to highlight because folks pick on it because it wasn't like a pure, OT compromise, a pure OT device connected. What we do at Claroty and Copia helps cyber physical systems as a whole. And Jerry's actually got a great quote we're going to talk about here.
Yeah, Pete, I love that you highlighted the Colonial Pipeline. This is something that has fascinated me. I read this HBR article by a professor from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, who had previously worked for FEMA, has a wide array of roles within understanding organizational architectures as related to cybersecurity attacks and system failures. And in reading this article, I pulled part of the quote. I wish I could have pulled the entire article in here, but I'll give a quick summary because she touches on the points that you were just talking through. And one of the things that I look at when I think about people, process, and technology for any successful organization that's trying to use automation and trying to grow in the margins, you get teams working together. And she talks here about how if the teams that were working around the Colonial Pipeline could have connected in a more focused, goal-oriented way where their goals were aligned, they could have potentially seen the risks, better understood what was happening with the attack, and mitigated the overall impact, vastly mitigated it. And I was so interested in this because I've been running case studies for the last year at Copia, and our customers who seem to be most successful are opening doors between IT, OT, and their CISO. They're meeting on a weekly basis, and they're talking about what they're working on, what technologies they're using, what risks they're seeing, and working together to mitigate those risks and plan for the event of a disaster. And this connection of people working on their process in a unified way and leveraging their technology to address everything that they're working on can make such a humongous difference for everyone. And those are the leading organizations, from my perspective, that are really pulling that together. And while it's easier in smaller scaling organizations, larger organizations have the exact same capability. All it takes is extending a hand and reaching out to try and work through things as a team, to not have that walled space where in the past I've heard so often, oh, well, IT is going to say no to that, or the CISO is going to say no to that, and they're going to do things their way, and we're set in our ways. It's really a time to embrace change and embrace everybody across your organization, because when you build that ability, it develops a culture of learning, and people can work together and solve problems together, and it helps fortify your defenses.
Yeah, and some of that divide is starting to fall, at least within the folks we're talking to. We're seeing that CISOs are now being tasked with the security of not only the traditional IT systems, but OT systems as well. And those are some of those conversations we really love to have, to educate, CISOs with a deep IT background. What's the best way to get visibility into OT and protection into OT with as good as or better compared to your IT tools? So we'll talk a bit around kind of where we've come from and where the market currently is from CPS cybersecurity. I kind of come from the early days where we were attempting to put things like, whitelisting and AV solutions on HMIs and other operating system based endpoints in OT, and that, went horribly wrong. I worked for some companies that developed kind of alternative solutions there, but no shortage of blue screens of death or limited visibility, or just frankly incompatibility with IT solutions, or folks attempting to do things like an Nmap scan or a Nessus scan, and all those things were disruptive, causing valves to open and causing wastewater to flow in places that didn't necessarily should or want to be flowed that direction. Antiquated asset discovery. I think my favorite asset discovery method to talk about here is, human capital walkdowns. So folks physically walking down the plant, writing down make, model, and serial number, taking months to enter that into a spreadsheet. And by the time the spreadsheet gets uploaded to, your system of record, those records are out of date. There's human error. There's limited visibility into those things. As we get into newer solutions, you've got the need to, if you're only looking at, say, a passive monitoring style approach, you're now being tasked with putting new hardware everywhere. So you're not looking at, best in breed, best in class ways to do asset visibility when it comes to CPS assets. You're getting, very little to no insight out of those spreadsheets. You're not able to correlate against network traffic, against threats, and it's just kind of a weak foundation for when and if you actually have either a cybersecurity event or a human error event, or literally if anything happens, you're kind of back to the square one of, well, how did we originally deploy this? What did the system integrator do? Who's changed hands? Is someone still at the company that understands how all this, magic OT infrastructure works? And now you've got this all stitched together in maybe a number of different solutions, and it's just really a really bad state. And these are kind of the things that we help our customers get over in a kind of a multi-step process. And some of that multi-step process is what we're actually going to talk about today, and how you can avoid continuing to do these pitfalls or even go down any of these roads to begin with, because there are better ways. So we talk a bit about the differences between IT and OT. In IT, I always like to fall back to, we're protecting data, we're protecting, intellectual property, information, databases, folks' email. And if there's downtime with email, or if you do have, an escape of intellectual property data that is certainly impactful to the organization. We've got lost revenue, lost wages, people not able to work. But in OT, kind of the stakes are different. The endpoints are different. In OT, we're protecting, a process, we're protecting production, and sometimes we're protecting actual human life with the safety systems and other things we have in place. So when there is a breach of OT, you can have things like explosions, loss of life. Certainly can have a similar, if not a greater impact than the IT environment, but it's just simply a different mindset with different people, with different endpoints and different protocols, and they need to be kind of treated that way. So when we start to talk about putting Copia and Claroty together, Claroty is obviously handling the visibility side, the threat detection side, the asset inventory side, and where you go from there is really exciting when you get into, okay, one, we first understand all of our stuff and what it's doing. Great. How are we going to go about doing DevOps to it and making sure that people have good visibility to all the changes that are going on in those systems? And maybe Jerry can talk about how those changes occur and what a unified approach looks like and how we bridge for kind of a digital transformation.
Absolutely. And just going back to a couple of your other points, Pete, talking about those human capital walkdowns, it's something we've heard from customers so much because they're walking around backing up files with a USB stick or a computer. And when IT sees these types of things, the way that technology is being managed, I think there's also a fear factor in that relationship that causes trouble. And one of the things Industrial DevOps does, it brings in those like-kind solutions so that IT and OT can work together. They can see that they're working in a similar approach to protect the operations, protect what they are working on. And it helps drive that visibility. It helps enhance the governance so that you know who's changing things, when they're changing things. You have an actual system to do it in a modern way so that those people that were previously walking around can make sure on a dashboard that all of the devices are backing up. And then if one isn't backing up, they can go and address that one and spend time figuring out why and improving it, rather than walking around every individual one. It's just a system that's set up when you have Claroty and Copia introduced into the IT/OT environment to build towards success and to foster trust within the organization. I know there's so much we can dig into about the technologies. They do amazing things. And I find that I always fall back on how having the right solutions, also having the right vendor that isn't just a vendor, as a partner that you can trust and work with, build that culture of trust and a focus on continuous improvement so that you are operating in the best-in-class way and taking these technologies and making the most of them because you're powering it with people and process. And I know we've talked so much about people and process offline, Pete. Did you have any additional thoughts there?
Yeah, I think we all as an industry, when it comes to industrial security, don't want to go back to the days of diskettes, CDs, and DVDs and USB sticks, locked in safes. And the only time we really think about them is when, the audit comes around and they open the safe and say, "Yep, here's all the things to recover right here." We want to make sure we're getting as close to modern as we can in the frame of industrial kind of development, right?
Yeah, 100%. Also, wanted to call out, if anybody in our audience has any questions, we will address them live, so please throw them in the Q&A.
Okay, so let's change gears a little bit and talk about kind of the typical steps that we use to get our kind of customers to that future-proof industrial complex. So first and foremost, bedrock to all this is establishing visibility to everything. Once you have that good visibility, you can kind of move to the next phase, which is, securing things, securing not only the devices, but their posture, and then really getting to that continuous improvement DevOps cycle where we know what everything is, we know how it's changing, we have the proof points, and we'll kind of talk a bit around each one of these steps and kind of how we go about doing them. So in that first initial phase, we're doing that asset discovery. We've got many, many different methods to do that with Claroty. So it could be anything from, that traditional passive monitoring to smart active queries to dynamic discovery to maybe some integrations with other tools that you have there. So you don't have to double instrument or, introduce additional hardware or traffic into the environment. We can assess those endpoints for risk and start to address the things that we know, the assets with purpose, assets that will have real consequences if they were to go down. A historian versus a PLC, they have different roles and need to be treated differently from a risk standpoint. And that's what we kind of help with. And then make sure you're implementing, actual backup solutions that have, a recovery time objective and a recovery point objective that the organization is happy with and can demonstrate and actually test that. Don't wait for the event to actually run your test or look at your documentation. Make sure you are actively exercising those backup solutions, because I think I've learned more during those backup exercises than any other exercise I've done in industrial. So as we move forward, we can now start to secure the network, layer in some potential segmentation technologies, or maybe it's access control. You've determined that the access to these endpoints is not managed well. There's little to no visibility into it. We have third-party vendors that have too many rights. We've got maybe a challenge around exposure management and chasm that we want to make sure that we're, limiting our exposure, limiting the connectivity of these endpoints to other things, make sure we're right sizing what our industrial complex looks like here. Then as we get into kind of phase 3, we get into that continuous monitoring, testing the system, looking to understand that, yes, one, we've got the right tools in place, we're monitoring them, we're sharing data with, our SIM or our SOC team. They're able to look at these threats, quickly address them, and then our secure remote access has been secured, and our complex is, being monitored and is about as secure as we can get. From there, we bring in our friends at Copia to help embrace kind of the whole industrial DevOps side of things.
Yeah, and bringing in industrial DevOps, it's taking what had been like in the OT space, not updated for decades, and bringing this modern approach, moving away from the Excel spreadsheets, managing version control. I was on a call with a customer a couple weeks back, and huge global customer running data centers, multi-billions of dollars, and they were frustrated because they were still managing version control in an Excel spreadsheet. And they brought Copia in to move away from that so that they had it in a system that was multi-vendor. So they have a lot of different data centers, a lot of different PLCs they're working with, and we're able to manage that code in one place with branching and merging so that different members of the team in different places could see what was going on. They could comment in line on the code. All of these different capabilities that are just not available in the traditional way that industrial code has been managed. It enhances that collaboration. It goes back to that culture that I was talking about that you want to develop between the IT, OT, and security teams. And when you're doing this, it tracks the complete history of changes. So if there is a downtime incident, a disaster that you need to recover from, you can go in and see the last working version of the code and back it up. You can revert right away and avoid a catastrophic incident like, I think it was Toyota in the fall of 2023 had 14 plants go down for an entire day, and it was estimated at 356 million in lost revenue because of a bad code update. Had they had the right system in place where they could quickly revert, it makes such a difference. So those are just a couple examples of how strong version control and configuration management and automated backup and testing can be to modernizing and helping organizations grow in the margins and really gain a competitive edge. Because while I wish everyone was doing this now, we have the early adopters and the fast followers in the space, and there is a lot of room to dig in and modernize your processes, modernizing your tech stack, and move forward and take that edge quickly. And of course, collaboration and training and all of this, that continuous learning. Like, we haven't touched on AI and we're not going to talk through it in this presentation, but just a quick note, we're going to see the speed of technology continue to accelerate, and having solutions like Claroty and Copia in there help support that continuous learning, continuous improvement loop so that you are always modernizing and not falling behind.
Absolutely, Jerry. And as we move kind of beyond, step 4, what does steady state look like once you've got good visibility, you've secured your environment, you're moving into some of the more advanced things like vulnerability and risk management and DR testing and prevention. Now you have paved the way to make any kind of governance and control very, very easy. You're not scrambling to find data. You're not, inventing new processes to satisfy the auditors. You just simply are running that same process that you've matured. And again, this maturity could happen very quickly. In some of our larger, more complex organizations, it's a multi-year journey with different steps for different departments and different adoption rates. But getting that kind of bedrock in place really helps when it comes to not only threats but governments. Any of these kind of standards that we've looked at and talked about throughout the presentation, doing all this puts you in an amazing position to be either compliant with them or to survive an audit against them without, having to re-architect and reinvent the wheel. So Jerry's going to talk a bit more about DevOps, because DevOps was kind of a new concept for me. And then I love the topic of DevSecOps and how getting these two solutions together kind of gets us closer to that kind of vision of DevSecOps for OT.
100%, Pete. And what we're looking at in the slides here, I won't dig too deep into this, but just for a high level of DevOps for IT, like, this is what Copia was founded on, seeing DevOps in IT, the Git-based source control, to tracking all the history of code so that you can see what's happened to it, who modified it, when, why, this essential information, and compare that granular level of detail to looking at these shared drives of files that are labeled by date or by final. It's near impossible with the way that many people that we've talked to before using Copia have managed their code files. If you have a disaster, you cannot find what you need and quickly revert, and that's a problem. Also, in DevOps, you have automated testing, and testing is moved into the development process so that by the time you're ready to deploy that code, you understand that it is solid, it is going to work. As Pete mentioned, we're working in the cyber physical space. It's essential to know that the code is going to work in the way that you need it to ensure safety. Another thing that helps with developing your culture, showing that you're invested in the safety and the well-being of your workforce. deployment management all tied into that, knowing what the impact's going to be when you deploy it out there, and observability and monitoring, that continuous governance to see what's happening, and then all of these benefits on the right. And if you move to the next slide, you can see the comparison of the lack of DevOps and OT, this lack of comprehensive backups and outdated file storage, the manual testing of people walking around to back up with a USB stick and test, manual deployment, limited observability. You have no way of knowing who has access to your industrial code. Many prospects that we've talked to over the years, when we're just introducing Copia, they talk about how that keeps them up at night. They have no idea who is touching, accessing their industrial code, and what they could do to the operations, harkening back to that huge cost of downtime. What if a disgruntled person just comes in, has access to the code, and shuts it down? There are so many possibilities that you don't have control over without a proper solution in place. And then on the next slide, Industrial DevOps, I always shout out that book. It's an amazing book and highly recommend it. But I also try to work this into almost every presentation I give. Deming, if you don't know him, he's pretty much the godfather of quality and automation. He went over to Japan to help establish post-war production. So very influential in developing the Toyota production system, which became lean manufacturing. And I love this quote: automation is not a replacement for a good process. It's a tool to improve an existing well-defined process. So as much as we talk about technology, I always go back to the equation of focusing on your people and then empowering your people to refine the process and take ownership over it, testing that process as much as possible, and then bringing in the automation, which leads us here to that loop of continuous improvement. And I don't need to dig too deep on this side, but this is exactly how I see Industrial DevOps help our customers, bringing that people plus process plus technology in that order together and empowering it to be optimized in the best possible way. And I see that with everything that we've done with Claroty and our joint customers, being able to take the technology and the people and the teams to bring that best-in-class approach and refine their operations.
Yeah, great point, Jerry. We've seen lots of projects either fail or stall or not complete due to kind of failure to understand the status quo, kind of much like that Denning quote where, well, we're just going to buy a tool and solve this problem. Like, no, you don't just buy a tool. You need to partner with someone who can get you over the hump of understanding what you have. And then once you understand what you have, you try to optimize it or secure it or change it. That really is like a great quote for IT and security industry wide, I think, when posed the right way.
And the last slide on Copia, just so we're looking agnostically at so many things. We're an omni-vendor approach, so working with all the PLCs as we're building integrations to make it easier for everyone to adopt Industrial DevOps. We want to be that single source focus to deliver Git-based source control, that best-in-class industrial code management, automated testing, figuring out deployment management in the right way, and observability and monitoring with AI-enabled workflows moving across that to really empower the future of however you're going to define it, Industry X.0, whether you're talking about Industry 4.0, whether you're talking about modernizing just from Industry 3.0, or talking Industry 5.0, and who knows what we'll be talking about next year. The vision is to, and not to drive it home too much, bring the right process to empower the people and deliver the technology that helps with all of this.
Oh, that's great stuff, Jerry, and very much the approach we take at Claroty to deal with that multi-vendor issue at any given industrial complex. It's for each net new vendor you bring in, you've got more complexities, and the more you can get them in a centralized tool with central visibility and processes, it just makes things much easier. So as we start to wrap up, we want to talk about kind of those steps, and just from a main takeaway standpoint, one, you want to make sure you have good asset visibility, right? That's kind of bedrock to getting to DevOps, to getting to security, to getting to understand, frankly, what you have. Otherwise, you're just kind of playing whack-a-mole with segmentation or firewall rules, or let's put some remote access over here and let's automate this process, but not that. So having a good understanding of your asset base is where we start. Once you have that good understanding, you can start to address and put in things for DevOps. So bridging the gap between IT and OT, getting the GSIs, the integrators, the on-site teams, and the OEMs all working together and understanding what they're doing for changes. You then can wrap some robust security controls around that, start to work on those advanced use cases around segmentation and remote access and vulnerability management and response. Not only establish, but test some of your DR best practices, test them regularly, and then continue to invest in that training and education bit. So these great solutions we put in place don't languish. They continue to be understood, trying to remove, those special pockets of information within your organization, so everyone is on the same page, and then look to next, right? There's obviously a roadmap that goes farther beyond getting to this state, and that's where we want to make sure everyone is investing. So with that, we can jump into some Q&A. I don't know how we're doing on Q&A. I can't quite see the Q&A screen, but let me try to do a switch here. I had one, Jerry, more around
Pete,
how do you guys differentiate from...
Can you hear me, Pete?
How do you differentiate? Hey, Laura, yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, I would be more than happy to help moderate with this, although looks like you have most of it. The first question that we got is, what measurable improvements in security and efficiency can a business expect by implementing this unified industrial DevOps approach?
I can kind of start with that one, and maybe Jerry, you can dovetail. But I think that the biggest thing when you get into that DevOps or DevSecOps loop is, one, you're getting much faster from a recovery time objective, and then much more granular from a recovery point objective. So think about today when you have a disaster and you don't have good visibility or understanding your backups. You need to go all the way back to the day that thing was commissioned or some other point in between where you happen to have good documentation. But if you're doing visibility and DevOps in real time, it's really just as simple as the last code check-in or the last time that you actually had an understanding of your asset base, which with Claroty is real time. So those are the ones that stick out for me.
Yeah, I'm going to point to one of our case studies. Amazon, one of our biggest customers, experienced an 80% reduction in code-related downtime by bringing in Copia. And when you think about those vast sums, 4.2 million per hour of downtime, it's an immense amount of savings when you have the right solution in place to have the visibility, the governance, the quick ability to revert and get back up and running in the event of a disaster.
That is an awfully measurable result there, Jerry. What are some common missteps that you see organizations take as they're trying to initiate these steps to protect their industrial operations?
I think the first one that stands out to me is not understanding your environment before you try to put in your protective controls. So oftentimes we'll have Claroty will come into a conversation where a customer is either mid segmentation or mid secure remote access project, where had they come to us early and kind of got the visibility part straightened out, we could have had a much more effective and faster time to value for those downstream solutions that provide protection.
Yeah, and I would just add, like, one of the biggest missteps is not thinking about how you're operating and what impact that is on your operations. We find pre-Copia that a lot of people just don't know what they don't know. And then you bring in the solution and you see the impact in terms of, oh, now we can collaborate. Oh, now the same person doesn't need to work on code from cradle to grave. And you can see the impact across your teams and how much faster they're working together. And I think it's important, as Pete was saying in the beginning of this answer, to understand what's going on and then start working with a vendor, with a partner, to address it and map out what technology you're bringing in, what people are impacted, get those people in to test it, work with it. I think one of the biggest things that leads to any technology failure is not having your skeptics in the room and not having your people that are going to be using the technology the most in the room, which sounds funny when I say it out loud, but it happens often that person that's going to be working on the technology every day is not a decision maker or even an influencer in the decision. That's one of the ones I call out routinely.
Absolutely, that makes perfect sense. That does it for our current questions. Gentlemen, any last thoughts from either of you before we wrap up our webinar today?
No, Laura, I mean, thanks for hosting, and Jerry, thanks for joining us, and look forward to what we do next together.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for presenting. This was a very knowledgeable session. For our attendees, a reminder, this session has been recorded and will be made available to you on demand starting tomorrow. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I wish you a wonderful rest of your day and a fabulous week.
Thanks everybody for joining.